And we're now live.
Great, thank you very much. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the planning meeting of the 22nd of April. As ever, if the meeting can be halted for whatever reason, technical or otherwise, minutes will be posted on our website. Please note this meeting is being recorded. And at the moment, all attendees are automatically muted. If you have a question or any particular application you wish to be part of, please let us know via the chat facility, and we can either allow you to ask your question in person, or if you want to write the question, we can read that out and answer it accordingly. Any Mendip councillors? I don't think we've got any Mendip councillors. Also, if you wish to ask questions, please just let us know. And voting councillors, please raise your hand at the appropriate time so that Jane or Hannah or myself can see very clearly, either using the raise hand facility or just raise the hand. Jane will clerk as normal, and Hannah will take the minutes. Jane will try and show photos and plans as and when they are necessary. As ever, we are running this meeting as a safe space. We encourage all participants to be respectful of others' opinions and views, and be mindful about what you say will impact on the emotions of others. And we do encourage debate, so we do encourage people to ask questions and get answers. So please carry on that format. I think that's about it at the moment. So without further ado, go on to agenda item number 1, which is any questions, comments, or information from the public which are not related to any of the applications in the current agenda. Doesn't seem to be any. Any comments from any district councillors? Don't think we have any.
No.
No. And any comments or questions from any of the councillors attending? No. Great. Agenda item number 2. Apologies for absence.
We've got apologies from Sheila Gore, Lizzie Boyle, and Anita Collier.
Okay, and I think John Nelson's got a sort of standing apology because he's overseas at the moment on
okay.
So if you could mark that, please, Hannah. And is there any declarations of interest from any councillors? No. Excellent. On to item number 3 of the agenda. To agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of April. Hopefully I've got them here if everyone's looked at them. If there's any questions, any clarifications on any of the minutes. Okay, if I could get someone to propose them, please. Thanks, Rich. Someone to second. Thanks, Anne, and all those in agreement. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Item number 4 on the agenda, to consider the major plan applications received. So, Jane, over to you. What's our running order for tonight?
So first of all, we're going to talk about the former factory shop on Palmer Street, and then the combined Saxonvale applications, Rose Bay, Nunny Road, then Cherry Grove, and then the retreat. So if I kick off with the application for the former factory shop, you'll recall that we have actually discussed this application before, and at that time we put in an objection. We were mainly concerned about the impact of noise on the occupants of the flats and the potential for that to jeopardise the business at 23 Bath Street. We also raised concern about overlooking of the nursery and lack of bin storage. Since then, we've been contacted by both the applicant and the agent, who have confirmed that there won't be any overlooking of the nursery, and that the bin storage has been addressed. We also received quite a lot of additional information regarding the noise levels and the mitigation measures that have been put in place that we weren't actually aware of at the time when we originally discussed the application. So in the interest of transparency, we thought we'd bring it back to this meeting so that we can discuss that in more detail. I've sent you all the information that has been received, updating that, but we do have Richard Charland here, who has actually put the noise assessments together, and I think it would be good for us to just hear and perhaps understand, because as we said before, we're not experts on noise assessments, so I think it would be really helpful to hear about the mitigation measures that have been put in place, and perhaps just understand how those original surveys were carried out a bit more. And just to remind you all that the application description was the alterations and change of use of the former clinic to A3/A4 offices and 4 flats, and part the former retail to 5 flats and 2 offices. So if he's happy to, this would seem like a good point to perhaps invite Richard Charland, if Hannah could make him visible for us.
Yeah, I'm just going to promote him to panelist. That means that if we put anything into the chat from attendees, it will also go to Richard as well. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so
Richard.
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Well, firstly, thank you very much indeed for letting me speak to you tonight. Very briefly by introduction, my name is Richard Charland. I'm a director of this my company, in Charland Limited, and I have something like 30 odd years experience in acoustics. And I fear my earliest involvement in the Palmer Street building is probably going back to the last century. So I've got a little bit of knowledge of the context and the history about this. So if I may, I'd just like to talk about 3 areas, and I promise I will be as brief as humanly possible. You've got a lot to talk about tonight. Just on the context of the application, the principle of the specific design here, and then the potential impact of this scheme on the adjacent businesses, which is obviously a matter of concern. So a word about the context. You're aware that consent was given in 2012 for some 9 flats in the central part of the building, some of which overlook the courtyard. Now that application was supported by an assessment by ourselves, and we'd surveyed noise levels in the courtyard and found relatively benign conditions there for all bar Friday and Saturday evenings, and the average noise levels did pick up quite considerably. I won't bog you down too much in numbers, but sort of 70 decibels at night. I mean, that's raised voices, quiet shouting, if such a thing exists, but that sort of level of noise at the windows. And the weekend conditions were probably 10 to 15 decibels louder than what you would find there on the other nights. So really sort of a doubling of the loudness at the weekends. So essentially, at that time, the building facade was designed to accommodate these very highest levels of weekend noise, to make sure that the internal conditions were absolutely bang on for residential occupancy, that the walls, the windows, the ventilation, and so on. The important thing I just wanted to make the point of, at that time, the environmental health officer, a gentleman called Graham Blanksby, he approved the scheme. He accepted that these would be the highest noise levels that the building would reasonably.
We seem to have lost you there, Richard. Hello.
I'm just promoting Anthony Pang as well, just because he wants to be able to answer questions too.
Good evening, Anthony.
I think we have a problem with Richard's sound.
Right.
Are we back? So did I lose you there?
Yes, you did. Yeah, you're back, Richard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just about the current application and the fact that we've repeated the surveys in 2019 prior to lockdown, some from the original monitoring position and new positions on the northeast wing where the new flats will be. And we try to get as close to the adjacent premises as we possibly could. Again, just to point out the logic that goes on, looking at the loft bar of the licensed premises, it looks like I think the weakest part of the building is probably the roof rather than the massive old stone walls. So we made sure we were in a position that was exposed to the roof, so one of the upper floor flats looking straight down onto it. Now the interesting thing was the conclusion that all of these surveys actually yielded very, very similar results, whatever position and whatever year, going back to 2011, I think the first one. So it seems, on the basis of sampling, that the pub is operating in a certain fashion, relatively consistently, same levels of noise. And so consequently, we did actually adopt the highest levels of noise recorded over a 10-year period when we designed the facade of these new flats. I have to say the most recent surveys are actually a little bit quieter than the ones we got back in 2010, but safe design, we've taken the loudest that we've measured. And we've looked at the walls, the glazing, the ventilation as before, and we're hitting the same good standard of amenity inside the buildings. Now, all that information was submitted to the council in 2019, and EHO at that time, Edward Van Dyke, he indicated his approval of the scheme. But again, just to show betterment, subsequent to that submission, in response, I think, to local representations, we've changed the internal floor plans again. We're trying to better the design. And specifically, the bedrooms on all bar the ground floor have been moved away from the courtyard elevation and swung round the corner so as to reduce the noise hitting those windows. The ground floor does retain one bedroom on that elevation, but I don't know whether you visited site. If you go, you'll see it has a very narrow exposure to the elevation, and it sits behind a very significant boundary wall, so it doesn't have a clean line of sight into the courtyard. And again, even though we've made these changes and we're protecting the bedrooms in this fashion, we're still designing the facade as if they're exposed to these highest levels of noise. So in actual fact, internally, we're actually doing much better than we were with the scheme that was permitted in 2012. Again, some context on the improvement, we're possibly 5 to 10 dB quieter in these bedrooms than those in the permitted flats. That's sort of like half the loudness of the noise coming in. So this is in many ways a better scheme. I don't know if this has relevance to your discussions or deliberations, but I will just say that I spoke with the Environmental Health Office a couple of days ago. They've confirmed that they're not going to be offering any objections on the grounds of noise to their colleagues in planning. So that's their position on this. So finally, thank you for your patience. Finally, just on constraints, the question of whether or not local businesses could be materially constrained by this application. A couple of things just to say about that. Firstly, we have to consider both the pre-existing flats, the old flats that look into the courtyard, and also the soon-to-be completed permitted flats, which are under construction, soon to be occupied. We might reasonably assume that the former, the older flats, that they're satisfied with the current operation of the public house. Don't know of any ongoing noise complaints. We know that the new flats being built, they're designed specifically to protect against the current operations. Now, if noise levels in the courtyard were to increase, what would happen? Well, in regards to those residential properties, there's an increased risk of impact. There's an increased risk of complaint. Numerically, the situation is such that there would be perhaps a suggestion of nuisance, but then the EHO has to judge that impact in the context of the area and how long things have been there and how often they happen and so on. So the point, though, is that there is already a constraint on the public house by the properties that are already there. The new development, whether or not it passes or fails, won't change that. The pub is constrained by its existing situation. Secondly, on this, it was said in the last meeting that there weren't any licensing conditions on the public house, but that's not the case. And I hope you've had copies sent to you of the licensing conditions. So way down the list, 39 to 43. You don't have to read them, but they're there. They very sensibly highlight that if there is a complaint, it's got to be judged by the EHO on in the context of the site again. It's not just a level; it's a manner of things. But but there's clear evidence in there that any event after 11 o'clock might need to be controlled to a level that's inaudible at any residential facade, particularly the ones which have already been permitted. Prior to 11 o'clock, it allows just a sort of notional 5 decibel lift above the ambient noise levels that would otherwise be there. And again, if you look at the current situation, the measurements we've measured, possibly 5 to 10 decibels above the ambient, and they're probably something like 30 decibels above where they would need to be if the noise is going to be inaudible. So again, there's a situation there which would constrain any further increase by the public house, which has nothing really to do with this new application. The pub is operating and it is running under a set of rules already. I would say, in defence of the pub, condition 44 gives them a bit of security, because that allows them to make an agreement with the Environmental Protection Department as to an ongoing limit that they can work to. It protects their ongoing interests, really. And in this particular situation, what Graham Blanksby said back in 2012 and what his subsequent successors have intimated with this application is actually that the levels of noise we're designing to probably do represent a reasonable level of emissions for that premises in this location. So I don't think really with that information you could say that the operation of the pub is going to be materially affected by the addition of these flats coming in. Yes, fine. And sorry, yeah, that's really all I want to say initially. I hope it made some sense. But if you've got any questions, please ask away.
Thanks very much, Richard. That was very informative. Thanks for that. Any questions from any councillors? Richard first.
I was looking at the application that you've got 46, it was, objections to the development at the moment, and they're all pretty much from people who use the pub. It just seems to me as though you need to kind of convince the pub that it's going to be all right somehow, if that's possible. This is not planning; it's not really a planning thing, is it? But is there some ongoing dialogue, something you could do to reassure them that they've got these conditions that they have to abide by, but also they've got possibility of agreements with the EHO and so on. And just the other thing is, when we last spoke as a group, we didn't have a report from the EHO, so that was missing from our kind of debate. So, but is there any possibility of a bit of mediation there with the pub?
I'll speak very quickly on a technical point of view. There is always possibilities, and I don't know how the pub operates at the moment, but any one of my peers from another company or whatever should be able to go and assist and look at how noise is breaking out of the building, whether it is music noise or actually is it customer noise in the courtyard, which is significant. And it's worth saying that if actually the most significant source of noise are people in the courtyard, that would suggest that they may have some headroom to add a little bit more music noise breaking out, providing they don't increase the total. So we don't. I mean, there are things that could be done in principle. It must be said. So, but in terms of dialogue, I would have to hand over to Mr. Pang on that.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. If I can ask one question as well, actually, as Councillor Ackroyd said, we didn't have the environmental health report when we first looked at this, and I think you mentioned that they're raising no objection. Does that mean that they're happy with the noise levels that exist at the moment and that will be there going forward?
Again, I shouldn't speak on their behalf. That's one for them to say. However, it's clear from both the original permission and the carried forward implications on this one is that providing the noise levels stay as measured and as reported, and providing the building is constructed as per the recommendations, then an acceptable situation will occur. And if a complaint were received, I think there was a note about putting an advisory on the planning consent. to advise people if you are going to move in, rent or buy. I'm sorry, forgive me, I don't know the commercial arrangements of the flats, but if you to live there, there would be an understanding that you know, you live in a position, and on 2 nights a week, you might find that you need to close your windows and rely on the mechanical ventilation to get fresh air through your flat. And therefore, as I said, when how an environmental health officer would investigate a complaint, it's not just the level, it is a wider context about, you know, the local area and the history and how things have arisen. So again, I can't answer for them, but the implication is they accept it.
Okay, great, thank you, thanks. Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, just one, as Richard was saying, I think the note that the environmental protection team put on there was that at times there may be elements of noise disturbance that actually wouldn't be enforceable. And somebody kindly confirmed to me that essentially that means if you have the windows open and you suffer from noise disturbance, that isn't a matter that the environmental health protection team would look into, because there is a requirement in order for it to meet the noise standards for you to keep your windows closed. And as Richard said, rely on the mechanical ventilation.
Sorry, any other questions from anybody? Only been doing it a year. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, thank you to all the kind of additional information that we've had. It sounds quite convincing. I mean, I'm personally, I'm kind of convinced, partially convinced. I'm still slightly concerned partly because of the email I've just been reading, which suggests that the public house is already breaking their conditions, and this is the situation that we're worried about, really. And obviously the pub is worried about, you know, that people will start complaining, you know, and looking into their conditions and suggesting that they're already breaking conditions, etc. So I think, as Richard suggested, a dialogue with the pub would be really reassuring from our point of view. You know, it's always best to have people talking to each other and coming to an agreement and reassuring. And and in a sense, I guess, if you don't mind me putting that question to you, Anthony, you know, would that be possible? You know, to ask Richard's question again, really.
Are you there, Anthony?
I know you were.
I think you were a minute ago, Anthony. You've just gone off. I think
Yes.
we can see you. We can't hear you.
Gone. That's a shame. That's a shame.
Never mind. No,
in theory, again, it's not. I won't jump to matters beyond my current employer, but yeah, in theory, there's no reason why not. And clearly, nobody wants to create situations down the line. I mean, you know, from Anthony's point of view, I'm sure it's the case, and he will nod or shake his head accordingly. You know, the flats would be eminently more sellable and/or rentable if the situation is as best controlled as possible out the back, and if there are simple things that could be undertaken. You know, in fairness, we've thrown the kitchen sink at the building, but if there are things that could be done in the pub which are not, you know, extortionate, expensive, you know, management controls, whatever, you know, more than happy to speak to anybody to go in there and you know, point them in the right direction.
Great, thanks, Rich. I mean, from my perspective, and I think, you know, we want a sort of a win-win situation where the pub is an integral part of the nightlife on a weekend in Frome, but also, you know, it's great that places like this are being brought back into the use for residential in the town centre. It all helps to keep it alive. So, yeah, as I say, certainly from my perspective, a win-win where everybody can, you know, sort of live in relative harmony is what we're trying to achieve, I think.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to raise a couple of other things. I mean, I know we're talking about noise now, but I think our original objection didn't just focus on noise. I mean, there was also the loss of employment space, which we're constantly concerned about in the town centre, particularly, and a concern whether this had been marketed adequately in terms of employment space. And the other one, I know the bins thing has been addressed, but the bicycle parking, it's one of those nice to have things. I know it's difficult on a building like this with no outdoor space, but if consideration could be made internally to accommodate residents' bicycle parking, that again would be very beneficial and from our point of view.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, any more questions? Any other comments from anybody? No. Excellent. So what I think what I'm hearing, and please jump in if I'm wrong, is that a lot of our concerns on the noise have sort of been addressed. I think we would love to see a dialogue raised between the developers, Mr. Pang, and the pub to see if they can, at least form a middle ground somewhere. I agree with Paul. I think we should look to, if you can, build in some bicycle parking. And this is a centre of town sort of development where hopefully people won't have cars and things like that. So if we can encourage bicycle parking, I think that would be great as well. I don't see that as an objection. I see that as more of a comment, quite frankly. That's what I've got. I don't know if anyone else has got anything else they want to add to that.
No, speaking personally, I feel like most of our objections have been addressed. So certainly the noise, we have to go on what the certificates are and what the environmental health say. And they say it's okay.
Yeah.
But the biggie is hopefully, just keeping good relations with the pub, because the pub, I think, are frightened that they're going to lose their license somehow. So yeah. I think if that can be kind of the message can be got out there that they're not going to lose their license and that things should be okay. I think that's the big worry for them.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Jane, what's the process here? Because do we have to raise another comment or?
Yes, I mean, I think given that it's been listed on the agenda for further consideration, so firstly, once we've agreed a response, you'd need to take a vote on that, and then what I can do is I will send those revised comments through to the case officer at Mendip, which I believe they are anticipated. They know that it's being discussed, so they'll be anticipating for the comments. Just as Paul pointed out originally, that we had raised concern over whether it had been marketed properly in terms of the loss of the employment space. So that will still be in our original comments, but it's one of those things that Mendip will make the assessment as to whether or not they feel that it has been marketed properly. So I'm not sure that we necessarily need to make reference to that again, because it's in our original comments. That will be looked at, but if you're happy to agree, I'll just reiterate what you said.
Hang on a minute, Jane. Richard, do you want to jump back in?
Do apologise. Anthony's just texted me and apologises profusely for his audio problems. But just saying that he is in conversations with the management at 23 and will continue to do so for that very reason of trying to get to the best solution for everybody. Okay, that was all. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Anthony. Thank you.
Yes, so if you're happy, suggested response could be that our concerns have our noise concerns have been addressed through additional information provided by the applicants. But we would ask that the consideration is given for bicycle parking for residents as part of the scheme.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're happy with that, if you or if you could take a vote on that.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jane. Can I get someone to propose that, please? Thanks, Rich. Someone to second it, please. Thank you, Mark. And all those in agreement? Great.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you very much for your time, your patience. It's not,
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
not the most exciting subjects in the history of the world. So
it's good to hear. Yeah.
Thanks, Anthony, even though we couldn't hear you.
Yeah, and thanks, Anthony, as well.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Shush now. We'll wish you well. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, and move on. Next bits of paper.
Sorry, I disappeared for a minute there. I hope I didn't miss too much, but my internet's moving around the house and I'm chasing it.
No, I think it was all pretty good. Okay, Jane, what's the
So the next application up for discussion is number 542 on our list, and this is Saxonvale Froome, and it's for works through trees in a conservation area and part under a TPO. So that is a crack willow, a sycamore, a Lombardy poplar, and a leyland cypress, and the proposal is to fell all of those trees. I was a bit confused by this application. I looked at the site location plan and it didn't appear to clearly identify which of the trees were being proposed to be felled. So I then looked at the application form, and the description in the application form actually makes reference to a lot more trees being felled than the description that has come through on the consultation. I mean, the purpose of obviously the tree felling is to for clearance to make way for the future development that has been approved under outline. But even so, I didn't feel that we could properly consider the application, given the lack of clarity between the two descriptions and the site location plan. It may just have been the way that I looked at it. Somebody else may have looked at it and seen it more clearly than me.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think, the applicant is Mendip District Council. We do know they're doing works on the site. We do know that certain trees will probably have to be felled. But there is, from what I can understand, a group tree protection order in this area, isn't there? So if it was any other application anywhere in the town, we would ask for that clarification. I think that's fair to say. Paul?
I mean, yeah, I agree. I just wondered if the confusion, I didn't actually look at the application form, sorry, but I just looking at the sketch, what they call the sketch plan, and it looks like there's a whole group of trees which is shown as G7, presumably all of which are going to come down. So with that, what in the description it appears they're only talking about something like 3 or 4 trees.
Yeah.
But one of those 3 or 4 presumably is this whole group, which is numbers probably 10 trees. Is that why there's a confusion, do you think? Or
I think so, yeah, because if you look at the application form, it actually lists all of the trees by name. So we could assume that that's what they mean, but
a clarification would be good. I agree. Yeah.
So we're not really raising an objection. We just really need clarification, I think, is the long and short of it, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, great. Do we need to vote on that?
We're not actually making a decision on the outcome of the application. I'm just going to go back and ask for some further clarification. So I think actually we probably don't need to. Following on from that, as part of the wider development of the site, there are also 2 further applications, she said, trying to find them. So numbers 558 and 559 on our list. Again, this is the Saxondale site, and the description is for the demolition of existing buildings 2, 3, 4 and 5, and rubbish clearance and soft strip of buildings 9, 10 and 11 as referred to in the demolition parameter plan under the outline permission. There's a lot of documents attached to this application, which includes tree surveys, which probably fed into the tree application that we were just talking about, heritage statements. The reason for these applications is, one part is that because in a roundabout way the buildings are attached by virtue of being attached to other buildings that are then attached to the silk mill, they're classed as curtilage listed buildings. So they require consent to be demolished and stripped. There is one that isn't actually attached to the silk mill in any way, but because that is still within the conservation area, you require conservation area consent to demolish an entire structure. The 4 buildings that they're looking to demolish, if you look through the heritage statement and the photographs that were attached, these are essentially buildings that, through the different lives of the building's use, were added, perhaps as an office or storage, and from basic materials, they don't have any real architectural or heritage interests attached to them. The Western Warehouse will remain with what was known as, I believe, Knott's office, which is to the, depending on which way you look at it, to the rear of the Western Warehouse. And they will be removing asbestos and various other bits from that building, essentially to make it safe. The heritage statement has to look at the impact that the demolition of the building will have on other surrounding listed buildings, so including things like St John's Church and other listed buildings along Vicarage Street. But actually what it seems to be saying is that by removing these, if you want to call them substandard buildings, it will actually enhance the appearance of the silk mill and the surrounding listed buildings. So from all of those documents, that's kind of what I've distilled it down to. And you will have all seen the Civic Society's comments, and actually they have no objection. And if anybody was going to have an objection to buildings being demolished, I would have suggested that the Civic Society would have picked it up. But and again, this is also that the site can be developed going forward.
Thanks, Jane. You haven't got anything to say add to that? Thanks, Paul.
I was just going to say, interestingly, considering we've got, I think it was something like 36 documents in here, I can't see the demolition parameter plan that was referred to. I know it was in the outline planning application, but you think they'd kind of put it again in this one, but
yeah,
obviously not.
I have to admit, I nearly lost the will to live trying to read through that lot. But,
but I don't. I mean, I think it's a lot for anyone to take in. But as what I saw, I didn't see anything that surprised me from. But maybe that's not the best way to approach this thing.
probably not.
But I take, because Paul, you're on the board there, so you'd be familiar with what's going on.
No. Interestingly, I mean,
right.
we've had no board meeting that's told us anything about any of this current stuff going on. So this is the first I've heard that they're actually applying for demolition.
But there's nothing there that takes you by surprise. So
no, not that I've seen. But like everyone, I haven't looked at every single document on this application.
It's that 36 page of that 7th, version of whatever it is, and all the details will be there.
Helen, did you want to raise a question? Good evening, by the way, Helen. How you doing?
Hello, everybody. Hi. I don't know how to get you to see me, so I'll just speak. It's just a point of information, really, is that this came to my notice, and I kind of tried to bat it away. I said, oh, Saxon Vale isn't my ward, but I've been asked to look at it in terms of process, because there is not yet a Section 106 agreement signed for the Saxon Vale development, and there is not yet what's called a decision notice on the planning portal. But these have come forward, and it seems to me what the questioner asked is, are they not predicated? Should they be going ahead at all until there is a decision notice on the main application? Or can they be considered as applications in their own right and treated as sort of micro applications? And I think I got a kind of a rather befuddled response, which I was trying to unpick, but I think I was told that they can be treated as applications in their own right, and they're not dependent on the main application. And also, I'm surprised you even got them, because I think it can be done by officer delegation as well. I'm not even sure if it can go to, if you objected, for example, I'm not even sure that the ward councillors can make it go to planning committee. I'm not sure about that, because as I say, I haven't looked in the detail because I'm not the ward councillor, but I thought you'd be interested to know that, if perhaps you already do.
No, thanks, Alan. No, it didn't. It's interesting, the Section 106 as well, isn't it? Because it's presumably they got to sign that at some time before things happen. Yeah, because that could be quite a considerable sum of money, couldn't it?
At the risk of muddy waters are getting muddier. Jane.
Yeah, I was just going to really confirm what Helen understood there. Any application submitted in its own right does have to be dealt with as a separate application, and the fact that the Section 106 hasn't been signed and there isn't actually an approval been issued for the outline application wouldn't stop this application being considered, albeit that consideration could be that they don't feel they're in a position to be able to make a decision on it until the outline application has been issued. But it does, as part of process, it does have to be registered and considered.
That would be my comment, would be we're not in a position to comment until such time as the decision notice is posted, I'd have thought. What do I know? Paul.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I think, can we actually say no objection subject to the outline planning permission being, whatever the term is, fully granted or approval posted or whatever, issued, yeah.
Hi, Helen, we can see you now.
Yes, hello. I think Mick Dunk is on the case, and he said, why aren't these part of the SEMP or the LEMP? I'm never quite sure which is which. And it's SEMP, it's Construction and Environment Management Plan. He said, surely this is part of the SEMP, which is a condition of the Outline Planning Permission. So therefore, these three applications are dependent on the outcome of the Outline Planning Permission. And the question I asked of the planning officers is it because we've approved it in theory, therefore you can give the go-ahead to these subsidiary planning applications on the assumption that they will be part of the SEMP? And I haven't had an answer to that yet, but Mick Dunk is on the case too. I mean, it's just a point of information. You have to make your own minds up about, it's about process, about whether or not you think it's appropriate or not. As Jane said, it actually in some ways could improve the setting of the silt mill. So, you know, there's advantages to them going ahead, regardless of whether the outline ever happens, you know, whether anything else moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, most of those buildings, the bits that are going deserve to go. There's no architectural merit in any of them. So to me, the sooner that, you know, if they're gone, they're gone.
Sort of agree.
But you could argue that why chop the trees down yet until
Yeah.
Because they're sequestering carbon until the outline is approved. Because what if the outline isn't approved for another 6 months or a year? I mean, it's unlikely, but you know, anything could happen with this site.
I mean, I guess that's the point, is it, that why Mendip are making this application now as a kind of separate application is because the outline is potentially delayed, as you say, for 6 months or whatever, and they want to just get on with demolishing and cutting trees down and things like that. But I think it's slightly risky personally, because, you know, supposing for some reason the outline permission didn't get full approval, some other proposal may actually want to keep, you know, one of some of these buildings. You know, it's probably unlikely, as Rich says, but it's possible.
But they might want to keep some trees. I mean, you could,
for sure. Yeah,
you could treat them all 3 separately and make a special exception for the trees, you know, because they are 3 separate applications after all.
Jane's giving up.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, I did put a little message on the chat board. I needed to get a glass of water because I keep coughing.
I mean, in theory, I mean, you're absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, they're going to go ahead and develop the site. They're going to knock the buildings down. Might as well get on with it. But it just seems strange that if the notice isn't been issued, it's the wrong way round, isn't it? In some ways. But apart from that, I've no real objection. I don't know if anyone else has.
I haven't got any objections.
Right. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Right.
Do we need to agree? Need to vote on that?
Okay. We're
I
agreeing.
don't know whether you wanted to take whoever's suggestion it was about no objection subject to the issuing of the outline consent.
Yeah, that works for me. I'll propose that. Go on. Thanks, Rich, for seconding. All those in favour. Great.
Unanimous, thank you. Right, so next on the list is, just check the number, it's Rose Bay Nunny Road. Bear with me while I find it on my screen. Okay, so it's number 546 on our list. As I said, Rose Bay 40 Nunny Road, Frome. And it's for a proposed hard standing, which involves the widening the entrance, a dropped curb and associated development. And I should explain for anybody viewing, which I forgot to do previously, that councillors have looked at all of the plans in advance. And in some cases, I've actually visited the site to have a look. So the reason for this application is to facilitate off-street parking for 2 cars in what would have been the back garden of the house via a gateway. There were photographs attached with the application which actually showed that there is already an opening in the wall, but it will require more of the existing dry stone walling to be removed in order for it to become wide enough. What's not clear from the plans is whether or not there is sufficient visibility splay in either direction. But I noticed that Highways' response was just standing advice, which normally relates to the fact that there needs to be enough car parking spaces for properties. So I took that as not being an objection from Highways in terms of a new access out onto the road. I think really that the concern is whether or not you feel that the removal of that element of dry stone walling will have a significant impact on the character of the area. And the Civic Society, I think, made some comments.
Yeah, didn't they? Yeah, they weren't happy.
So the Civic Society have said that they're objecting, and the drawings of the exact location and extent of the proposed works are required. The proposal to extend the existing breach in the stone garden wall to 5 metres wide plus 3 metres additional lowered sections will degrade the street scene and frontages. The wider top curb and opening will create a large exposed car park in what was a garden. Portland Road is narrow and alterations to the access. Oh, just press the wrong button and I've completely lost it. I do apologise.
I can fill in. Portland Road is narrow and alterations to access should be subject to county highway visibility display rules.
Yeah, thank you.
There is a big hole in the wall already, isn't there? Looks like it's been there for some time. Yeah. So right, I've got Paul first and then Rich.
I think this is obviously part of a kind of a wider debate in some ways about car parking and traffic, etc., etc., and whether people, ideally should be turning their gardens into car parks, which is a real shame. But unfortunately, that's where we are at the moment, and in some ways, it seems getting 2 cars off the highway into a garden is a positive thing because the highways are all so clogged that would park cars. However, are we losing on-street parking in Portland Road? And if we are, we're not actually gaining anything, are we? In fact, we might. What we're effectively doing is we're turning what was two or three spaces in Portland Road, which were available to anybody, into 2 spaces which are exclusively available to the people of this house. So we're not gaining anything. We're actually losing ultimately in that sense. So because of that, I'm kind of minded to object to it, really. I don't necessarily go along with the Civic Society concerns about the kind of appearance of the stone wall and etc., but definitely losing a garden to turn it into a car park would be a real shame.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Rich, and then Mark.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Paul on some of those points. Actually, in fact, it's so common now that people bulldoze their front garden and put cars on it that I've got so used to it and saddened by it over the years. It almost doesn't register anymore. So thanks, Paul, for reminding me that's an important consideration. I was, how come it's already fallen down? If it's fallen down or it's been pushed, I don't know, but there's already a much bigger gap there than there ought to be. My big concern was there's no real thought about exactly where it is. There's no really accurate dimensions about exactly where along the street it's going to be. You kind of left to guess. And also it seems like really poorly finished. There's no sort of no idea of how the ends of the walls are going to be finished off, whether there'll be a pillar there, will there be a gate. So they felt like incomplete plans to me, was my initial thoughts. But I go along with what Paul said. It is a shame to lose. And I'm less worried. Somebody commented about the recessed pavement, the dropped curbs. That doesn't bother me too much. But I would, can we have some better drawings, please? A bit more information. Let's put some thought into this. If you're going to do this, do it properly. It would be my thinking.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark.
Yeah, what they both said, but the drop curb will prevent at least 2, possibly 3 cars parking in Portland Road, and this is opposite the new house that's being built on the corner there, which we saw not long ago, retrospective application for the garage they were building there, which was denying at least 4 spaces to the HMO next door. I don't know where that's gone with Mendip, but the drop curb will deny a further 2 spaces at the minimum. I know 2 cars will be able to get in off the road there, but that's purely for the benefit of the householder. So in view of parking generally in the area, this will have a bit detrimental effect, which we've already commented on with this previous application.
Yeah, agree. Thanks very much. Any other comments from anyone? From my perspective, I'm minded to agree as well. Obviously the wall has got a big hole in it already. It looks as though it's been there for a while, but yeah, that house that you mentioned, Mark, that's the HMO, isn't it?
It's the new house that's been built there,
yeah.
by the local developer.
Mm.
And they built a garage in the back garden opposite this hole in the wall, which originally was the parking for the HMO, which is next door to the new house. The excuse being, well, people who live in HMOs don't have cars. But I think that's unlikely.
Yeah.
And this will put further pressure on what's already, people already park up right up to the corner of Nunny Road and Portland Road. Trying to pull out there is often quite dangerous, and this will only make it worse.
Great, thanks. So I'm hearing we've got two issues. One is the drawings are not really reflective of what's going on, and we'd like to see something with a bit more, well, a lot more detail. And secondly, the actual loss of parking spaces, general parking spaces, not private parking spaces. Is that a reasonable synopsis?
Yeah, I'm not persuaded by the detriment to the street scene as the Civic Society mentioned. I don't think, Paul mentioned it, but that's not really the issue here. It is the parking issue and the danger that presents.
Great. Excellent. Any other comments? No. Great. Well, have you got, got something?
Yeah. So clearly an objection. So the creation of the new opening will reduce the amount of on-street parking, which will impact on residents in the area. Concerned that the access will also make this stretch of road more dangerous in terms of vehicles entering and exiting the site. May not feel this is strong enough. We regret the loss of the garden area, and the plans do not provide sufficient detail in terms of finishing, and more detailed information is required.
Yeah, I think it's the drop curb that will prevent the parking rather than just the hole in the wall.
Okay,
if people are to respect the drop curb, which we hope they do, that precludes at least 2 cars, probably 3, parking there.
I'll add and drop curb into that part of the sentence.
I mean, I think it might be useful if we're asking for more information in terms of drawing that actually they could confirm how many on-street parking spaces will be lost.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Good point. Good point.
Okay. Yeah, I'll add that in as well.
Great. Okay, can we vote on that then, please? Someone to propose that. Thank you, Mark. Someone a second. Thank you, Rich. Thank you.
And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Tiny meeting.
Can I make a general point, which is before I became a councillor, I was very irritated by people that get drop curbs so they can park on their front gardens. And I made it one of my missions, which I've done nothing about so far, was to try and stop it, to get a policy where we stop it, because I think that's in Mendip's remit. And I found out recently that it costs, I think just from a Facebook post, that that Mendip Council gets £800 to £1,000 for every application they get in for a dropped curb. And now I'm thinking that's going to be an uphill battle, because they won't want to give up that kind of income. But I agree, as I put on the chat, that it privatises public space. It takes away parking from other people, and that sort of irritates me. But it is on my agenda as one of my missions.
Right.
Helen, is that money that comes from the government then, just to facilitate the dropped curb, or is it?
I think the applicant has to pay.
The householder.
The householder.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
They might know more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure that it's Mendip that gets the money. I think it's County Highways, because effectively they are paying for a license to alter the highway, so the footpath. So I think, as I said, that it's Somerset County Council that get that money. and that is so if it's approved, there'll be conditions on it that it has to be carried out by a qualified contractor who's licensed to work on the highway, and that's what the money's for.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thanks,
It
Jane.
makes me realise I probably won't have any effect then, even if I were to go in a battle stations mode.
Still worth trying, Helen. We'll be behind you.
Hello. John Clark. Where did John Clark come from? Hello, John.
Can't say hello back.
Well, we've already discussed Saxon Vale. I think possibly maybe John's here for Saxon Vale, but what do I know? Oh, John's here on the chat line.
John's here. Right, what's the next, Jane?
Okay, so next on the list is number 560, and this is 5 Cherry Grove. The application is for the removal of the existing two-storey house extension, refurbishment of existing dwelling, including a new single-storey rear extension, and 2 new 2-bed, 2-storey semi-detached dwellings. Oh, sorry, that was a mouthful. So this application, the existing dwelling on the site is a semi-detached post-war 2-storey house, part of the original development of 14 Cornish housing units that were on the site. So 10 of the original properties are going to be demolished as part of a new Astor housing development, and the 2 pairs of houses on the north and south sides of Cherry Grove, which are adjacent to the Cherry Trees Care Centre. So the existing house is on what's described as a generous plot of land, was extended some years ago, with the extension mimicking the architecture of the Cornish design houses, which doubled the footprint and floor area of the original dwelling. The property is currently vacant, having been bought by the applicants with a view to providing a 2-bedroom home for the applicant's mother and the addition of 2 further small first-time buyer homes. My first thoughts when I looked at it was that the two new properties that they were proposing, I didn't think that they sat well within the development. I know design is, everybody's got their own thoughts about design. I just didn't really feel that they fitted in, and I know that some of you have been to visit the site, and actually there are concerns about, is there enough room for this to fit on the site? And I'll just check the Civic Society's comments.
I've got them here if you want.
You've got them there.
Yeah. Do you want me to read them out?
Yeah, if you don't mind, because I
Okay,
seem to be having a bit of trouble.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm on it. Don't worry. Objection. On the grounds of overdevelopment and the impact on neighbouring properties, the proposed new houses are cramped and appear to be below the minimum GIA recommended by the nationally described space standard for a 2-bed, 4-person dwelling. Each external space is inadequate. The front doors to number 5 and the new dwelling next to it will be very awkward proximity. The existing front door will become a wasteland of solid forecourt parking for 6 cars, which will detract from the street scene. The amount of vehicular movements in the narrow street will cause congestion and nuisance. The development will harm the amenity of number 3 and the semi-detached house opposite. The new rear extension to number 5 will overlap the view from the rear of number 3, given the garden angle. All dwellings should have charging points. So, yeah, there you go. Their comments. Rich, and then Paul.
Yeah, it seemed to me horrible when I looked at it. It just jarred, actually. When you looked at the plan view, I thought, yeah, that's horrible. I don't have any objection to making the big house smaller, but if you're going to put 2 other tiny houses so close together, you might as well knock the whole thing down and do a proper job with 3 new houses or 4 new houses and give them all a bit of equal space would be my solution to that. But yeah, I don't like it as it is.
Okay, thanks. Paul?
I'm going to go against the general feeling here, because I actually think it's fine. It's cramped, obviously. I'm trying to get 2 houses in there, but I think it works personally. I like the fact that the original house is reinstated as it was, and you can't knock down half of a semi-detached house terribly easy. So I don't think that would necessarily work. But I mean, I do agree. One thing I do agree with the Civic Society said is about all the car parking at the front. I mean, that's tragic, but unfortunately, that's what we've got everywhere. And because of car culture, etc. Too many cars, and I don't see how that can be avoided. But other than that, I mean, it's just looking at the plan. It's a real shame, because if it wasn't for the car parking, you could bring these 2 semi-detached houses possibly slightly further forward and give them a bit more garden space. But given the constraints, I don't have a problem with it.
Fair enough. Interesting. Any other comments from anybody? No. Interesting. I thought it was a bit. I drove around the site today, I must admit, and it is tight around there. There's no 2 ways about it. And I guess that's why they're doing the 6 car park spaces at the front, because there's no other way it would work without the car park spaces at the front. That was sort of my general view. Okay, we have a disagreement. So what do we vote on first?
Well, why don't we say something like mixed opinions?
Yeah.
Some of the committee felt this, some of the committee felt that. Is that the kind of response we can write? I'm not actually the designs of the new houses per se. I'm not against particularly. It's just that where they are located so close and at that angle, it just kind of. I agree with Jane's comments. I'm sure there will be. And Civic Society's comments, actually, it feels to me like they will kind of interfere with each other.
When I looked at it, I thought the extension to the existing house was actually going to impact the bit that's the other semi. It seems to jut in. I don't know if it's the way that it's built.
It dog legs out over. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. I think that's a reasonable comment, actually. Yeah.
I don't know. It's difficult to see on the plan. When I drove around there, of course, you can't see at the back, but that extension itself just seemed to be at a very odd angle and sort of jutting into the land, or certainly they would look at it if they looked out their back window straight. They're going to look straight onto this extension. So that part of it, I was very nervous. Well, didn't like at all. Yeah. New houses, yeah, we're always looking for small new houses, definitely. But Paul,
just, I mean, looking at the elevation, the rear elevation, it doesn't appear that that extension would be in front of a window. Because the window is kind of set further towards the middle of that house. But I do take the point that
they would look at it,
dog legs.
Yeah, out of yeah. I mean, yeah. That seemed to be quite imposing to me, I must admit. I thought that, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jane, how can we? I mean, can we report a difference of opinion on, or do we have to come up with something?
Well,
Sorry, Paul. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick suggestion. I mean, I wonder what my colleagues here would say if rather than this being 2 new dwellings, it was 1 new dwelling.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be.
Yeah.
Could we actually all agree on that? Do you think?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I could get behind that, definitely. Yeah.
I think we've got agreement on the big house being made smaller.
Yeah.
I don't object to that at all. I think it's a pretty probably a good idea to put it back as it was. But yeah, it's the other 2 new houses that are causing the issue. So yeah, if it was 1,
I could definitely agree on 1. Yeah, no problem.
So would that be a kind of a no objection in principle? However, we would prefer rather than 2 new dwellings, it would be 1 dwelling, or is that an objection because we'd rather
I would say it sounds like an objection, if I'm honest. Just to answer Steve's previous question, you know, could we report back that there's a difference of opinion? That's not really helpful. I don't think it, and will probably just be perceived as being neutral. So I think if we have got concerns about it, we need to be clear about the fact that we've got concerns about it, but incorporating, you know, a suggestion that would help remove that objection, I think is a helpful thing to do. So I think what I've picked up is that that the proposal is dominated by car parking to the front of the properties, and the development appears cramped with the two new houses, and that the two-storey extension will impact on those two new houses, and we would prefer to see one new house which would deal with the cramped feel of this development.
It would also reduce the car parking by two.
And reduce car parking, yeah.
Helen's just asked a question about, are they chopping another tree down? I didn't spot that, but they might be. I didn't notice it.
I didn't see
I've just
it.
looked at an elevation online. I'm just looking at it now, and it looks to me as if there's a tree to the left of the, I'm looking at the existing plans, and there's a tree to the left where the house has been extended. And so I'm just thinking that tree's probably going to have to go. They're on this site, they're on the other side of Cherry Grove that Astor are developing. They're chopping a lot of big trees down. It's just an observation.
Well, you can ask the question.
I'll add, it appears that tree will need to be felled.
Yeah, it's a good question to ask, actually, because I hadn't spotted that.
I think from the owner's perspective, if they were to change from two to one house, I mean, financially it probably wouldn't be any great difference. They could build a bigger single house, and you know, and as I said, I think financially it wouldn't make a big difference, but it would make quite a large difference to that actual plot.
I've added a comment about the tree to what I've just read out, and the Paul's point about it will reduce the car parking to the front as well.
Excellent. Okay, can we all agree on? Are we all in agreement on that? Great. Should we vote on that then, please? Someone to propose that? Thanks, Anne. Someone to second it? Thanks, Rich. And all those. Great. Excellent.
That's unanimous, thank you. So the last application that I've highlighted for discussion is the application at the retreat, mainly just because it's, you know, it's in the news at the moment. So this is number 547 on our list. As I said, it's the retreat Froome. This is an application to vary or remove condition 2 from the consent that has been previously issued on this site. Essentially, the barns stroke workshops on that site have been demolished, and that wasn't clear that it was part of what was approved on that first application, and it's not something that has been specifically applied for on the second application because they've already been demolished. So if that condition is varied, essentially that will give them retrospective consent for the buildings that have already been demolished. It's suggested in the application that actually that it's not for the current full application that's been submitted to deal with the retrospective demolition of those buildings. So it is a roundabout way of getting retrospective consent for them to be demolished. However, the demolition of those buildings doesn't, in my mind, have any impact or any bearing on the footpath that there is a debate on as part of the second application that's been submitted. And yeah, so it was just really to highlight that this application had been submitted and just to check whether anybody has got any concerns about that application or questions going forward. Rich has got his hand up, but Steve's not looking.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with this. So this is, you're quite right, this is the original application. The barns were knocked down, they weren't supposed to have been, but so they've got a new application that they put through, which was deferred because they didn't have permission to knock down the barn. So this is their way of getting permission retrospectively. They don't intend to build what's there. They're going to go with their new plan, which they are appealing because they're going to go to appeal because Mendip are taking so long to make up their mind about it. So that's what they've decided to do. And you're quite right, Jane. It's nothing to do now with the footpath, which is something that myself and Councillor Shane Collins have been in contact with the developers about. So Helen Kay is very familiar with this. As you pointed out, there are actually were three applications. There was one before that as well. But essentially, I've been told that they are likely to get this, and it was at Mendip Planning. I think it was seen as a way of buying everybody some time to actually have some dialogue and to work a way forward, which seems to be happening. So I think as they're already knocked down and they weren't listed, I think I don't have any objections to this particular application. Helen might want to add in things.
Yeah, Helen, do you want to make any comment?
Not, I mean, really, yeah. I mean, Rich has summed it up. Really, I mean, there's not a lot we can do. I think that at the planning board meeting, it was seen as a way to get them to agree to a footpath, and it sort of backfired, really, sadly. And so they're just going to go straight to appeal. However, it will cost them, or it cost us, as Mendip. So, and I don't think they really want to go to appeal. So there is still, on the original one that was turned down, so there is still a possibility of negotiating around a footpath. But just dealing purely with the Barnes issue, I don't think there's much we can do, really. And Carlton Langford, is that his name, has already indicated to me he will do it under officer designation. He'll just approve it, because it would be seen to be unreasonable not to, because they weren't listed, they're not special. Even though they've broken the terms of the original planning, that is not unusual apparently for developers to do that.
Yes.
Okay, so are we happy to agree and no objection on the application?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Great. Thank you.
unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so I haven't actually specifically highlighted any others for discussion on the assumption that would mean that we don't have any objection to any of the others that we want to highlight, but there may be some applications that you specifically want to raise for discussion that I haven't highlighted.
Any other ones? No. The only one one I was going to make a comment on was number 548, which was the Royal Oak, the outbuilding they intend to put alongside the pub. And I sort of agree with you, Jane. The only concern would be noise, but if the opening or closing times of the food outlet was the same as the pub, I don't really see an issue on that. But I couldn't actually see from the documents what the opening or the closing time of the fast food thing was.
I think it was to run concurrent with the operation of the pub.
Okay, if that's the case, that's fine.
Yeah. In which case, then oh, Paul's got his hand up.
Sorry, Paul.
Mute.
Just before we finish, I just wanted to just double check. I was just looking at 556 because what we've got goes forward is what you've written in your comments, I think, and I just wanted to check exactly what your comment meant on 556. Is that a no objection comment?
So my notes are really just to highlight what I've picked up from looking at the applications,
yeah.
And generally the ones that we don't discuss, assume it's on the basis that we don't have any objection to them.
Right,
so,
of course, yeah.
So it won't necessarily be my comment that in the notes. That's just really, if you like, my opinion. Something if you want to take it up and discuss it, but if not, then it's really a no objection.
Great.
I did look at that one. It's on Keyford. It's just where the Bookies is. It's the next house on. It's a rather grand Georgian house with a front garden as you're going up towards the crossroads. And the side extension would effectively be behind the Bookies. It does create, it is going to be very dense around there because there's that new building that's been built also on Woodlands, whatever it's called.
Woodlands Road, yeah.
Yeah, and so it basically, it's going to densify the back garden areas all around there. But I mean, what else can we do? I didn't object to it when it went through because I just thought no one's going to see it really anyway. It's not really going to be very visible from the road, and we've got to build somewhere. It's better than on a green field. So
yeah, I wanted to kind of. Oh, sorry, Rich. I just wanted to say I wanted to welcome it because it's actually using quality materials much more than we normally see in most applications. So and it's, in my opinion, it's an interesting, bold design, but others might not necessarily agree.
No, I didn't object to it. I just found it really hard to understand. I must be getting old. It took an awful lot of time for me to work out exactly where it was and what exactly was being done. But yeah, I don't object.
Any other comments or questions? No. Just one question from me to you, Jane, actually. There's a response from Helen, really. So when a developer fails to adhere by the planning or the conditions of the planning application that they've got, what is the right of recourse from either, the district council or whatever?
So if they haven't complied with the conditions, and as a result of that, something needs to be rectified. If there is something has happened that could mean that enforcement can get involved, the first thing that the district council would do would be to ask them to submit a retrospective application, or, as we've just seen, variation of a condition that would deal with that. If that application then goes on to be refused, then they can take enforcement action, and what that enforcement action might entail would obviously depend on the breach that has occurred. If they don't submit an application to rectify it for whichever route, then again that will result in enforcement action being taken, and depending on the severity of what they've done that's wrong, that depends on what action that men would take. in my experience, it's normally the case that most things can be dealt with through a retrospective application.
Yeah.
It might mean that they are required to make some slight alterations to if it's something they've built. Clearly, they can't alter the fact that they've demolished buildings. In the previous one that we were talking about.
It wasn't. No, well, actually, it wasn't related to that. It's related to another development in Frew, where the developer in question should have done something after a certain number of houses were occupied, and that was some time ago now.
Yeah, so again, my understanding is that would be for the enforcement team to look at, to determine what the impacts of them not having done something they should have done are. So that could be either a financial payment towards it. So if it's a Section 106 that hasn't been paid on time, in terms of money that's required, I believe there is a calculation they have for a delayed payment. If it's something that hasn't been provided, such as a play area in line with the terms set out in the Section 106, I'm not sure what the consequences are for that. You could argue that you might want to see a payment to go towards more public space or upgrading of public space. I think that would be a question that we would have to ask Mendip directly.
Right. Okay.
As to what they could do.
Great. Thanks very much.
I don't think we actually voted on the rest of the applications that we didn't discuss. If you're happy for those to go forward.
Yeah. So if we're happy for all of that. Oh, sorry, Helen, did you want to?
And I know you've already discussed the retreat and you voted on it. It's just that Shane and I still have the option to take it to planning board, even though we might lose and it might turn out to be a waste of time. But that it could be a test case of of the question you just asked. Like, well, what does happen when somebody breaks their conditions? When they don't do what they're supposed to have done.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. All right, can we vote on all of the other applications, assuming there were no objections on them? So if someone could propose that, please. Thank you, Paul. Seconded by Rich, and all those in favour.
And that's unanimous as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, that finishes the meeting for tonight, and the next meeting is on the 13th of May is our next planning meeting. So I look forward to seeing everyone on the 13th of May. Oh, Jane, sorry. What have I missed?
Yeah, just something quickly about the next meeting. I think you'll all have seen the information from government saying that the legislation that allowed us to hold virtual meetings won't be in place at that time. However, talking with Paul Wynne, because we know that there are concerns amongst councillors and perhaps the public about, whether we're in a position to be able to safely hold a public committee meeting. Paul has a suggestion for how we might be able to continue to do that virtually. That hasn't, and I believe the announcement about government extending the legislation to enable virtual meetings to take place is going to be today, but we haven't actually seen it unless it's happened during this meeting. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, hopefully the next meeting we will still be able to hold virtually in a very long-winded roundabout way.
Hasn't the Secretary of State taken his own Department of Court over it or something like ridiculous like that? It was,
I was going to suggest that we could all go to the town hall and meet and sit in different rooms on our own and do a Zoom conference. Then we'd be kind of meeting and on Zoom. How about that?
Does that mean that any public attending have to run round to each room?
Oh yeah.